Thank you. I feel it's both fitting and an honor, actually, to follow you, Matthew. And I knew your father very well. I knew his good works very well. And I also knew he was very much committed to the U.S.-Israeli relationship. He wasn't just committed to his Judaism and to Israel. He was a deep believer in the U.S.-Israeli partnership. And I want to talk about that, having written a book called Doomed to Succeed, the U.S.-Israeli relationship from Truman to Obama. By definition, I'm not just a believer in it, I'm also an optimist about it. And I want to explain in these times why I remain an optimist about it. One way to do it is by putting it in perspective, by also understanding some of the lessons that we haven't learned over time, some of the mistakes that American administrations have made historically. If there's one constant lesson not learned that I found as I looked through the different administrations, it's that there was a tendency for us always not to understand the priorities of Arab leaders. I'll start with an example, a recent one. President Obama, as you all will recall, a couple of weeks ago went to Saudi Arabia. He met with the leaders of the Gulf Cooperation Council. This was a mission, if my book is called Doomed to Succeed, this was a mission that was, shall we put it, not doomed to succeed. The president was going there trying to persuade the leaders of the Gulf Cooperation Council to do more to fight ISIS. It was the right message. It's the right point to be emphasizing. But their priority is Iran. They see Iran as the main threat. Getting them to do more against ISIS depends upon them seeing us being prepared to do more to compete with the Iranians. The starting point is to understand their priorities. A second example. Look at the administration's response in the first couple weeks to what many call the knifing intifada. For the first couple of weeks, the reaction was to call for calm and an end to the cycle of violence. Now, the fact is, what was going on was the most intimate form of terror. Literally, stabbings are, and there's no other way to put it, they're bloodletting. Quite simply, they're bloodletting. There's no other way to describe it except terror. And yet the impulse initially was to call for calm and an end to the cycle of violence. And the reason was, it reflected a mindset, which was, gee, if you single out only the Palestinians for criticism, it'll produce a backlash from the Palestinians and from the Arabs. Now think about it. At the time, what was going on in the Middle East? We're talking about October, this past October. So there's a preoccupation, what is a horrific war in Syria, a proxy war in Yemen, a struggle with ISIS in Iraq and Syria, Egypt dealing with radical Islamists in the Sinai, Iran's hegemonic ambitions. All of these things were the preoccupation and are the preoccupation of Arab leaders, but this initial impulse was not to criticize only the Palestinians. Now, I'm saying this not to single out the Obama administration, because the fact of the matter is, the mindset that drove that, at least initially, is a mindset that has existed in every administration from Truman to Obama. It is a mindset that has been embedded in at least a part of the national security apparatus from Truman to Obama. It is a mindset that is driven by a perception that Israel is more of a problem than it is a partner. Now, the three assumptions have been embedded in every administration from Truman to Obama. In every single one, these three assumptions have existed. The first assumption is that if you distance from Israel, you'll gain with the Arabs. And 5 different administrations did that. Eisenhower did it, Nixon did it, Carter did it, the first Bush did it, and Obama did it. In every case, those presidents came in and looked at their predecessors and thought they were too close to Israel and it had cost us, and they made a conscious decision to try to distance from Israel. When you go through the administrations that I did, when you read the book, as I hope you will, as I think you should, one of the things you're going to see that I show in every administration that sought to distance from Israel gained nothing. I can do chapter and verse on the examples, but I'm not going to do that right now since I don't have a lot of time. I understand the rigors of this kind of a conference. You were given a set amount of time to talk. What most of you don't know is there's actually a trap door under my feet. All right, so the first assumption was distance from Israel and you gain with the Arabs. There's a corollary. Cooperate with Israel and you lose with the Arabs. Again, I can do chapter and verse, but I want to cite one example that is perhaps the best, but certainly by no means the only. The first president to provide arms to Israel was John Kennedy. Truman doesn't do it, Eisenhower doesn't do it, Kennedy does it. Kennedy provides purely defensive weapons to Israel, the Hawk anti-aircraft missile. These were not mobile, so they could only be used against attacking aircraft. There was a tremendous debate within his administration before he made the decision to do this. Almost every ambassador we had in the Arab world sent in cables describing literally how the sky would fall. It was as if Chicken Little was riding these cables in. We would see our position collapse in the region. The Secretary of State was Dean Rusk. His argument was basically encapsulating what they said. He said, do this, Mr. President, and it will cause grave damage to the American position in the region. Now, as luck would have it for Kennedy, as luck would have it for Dean Rusk, the day that he's meeting the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, it happens to also be the same day that the news of the sale becomes public. And what does he find when he sees the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who, by the way, was the real leader of Saudi Arabia at the time, Crown Prince Faisal? Faisal's not focused on this issue. What is he focused on? He's focused on the coup in Yemen, which is backed by Nasser. He says Nasser's trying to gain a foothold in the Middle East. He's trying to gain a foothold, not in the Middle East, but in the Arabian Peninsula, to threaten Saudi Arabia. We need you to provide arms and assurances to us. The arms to Israel, he doesn't raise. What's he raising is arms from the U.S. to Saudi Arabia. 1 week later, he goes to see the President of the United States, Kennedy, in the Oval Office. Does he decide at that point to raise the arms to Israel? Is that his preoccupation? It's a pregnant pause there. Obviously, had that been his preoccupation, I would have written a different book. He doesn't raise it. What does he raise? He raises our outreach to Egypt. He raises the fact that when Kennedy came in, he decides to provide economic assistance in the form of PL-480 funds, where you use American dollars to buy wheat from American farmers to provide to countries overseas. When Faisal comes to see Kennedy, at that point we are providing 2/3 of Egypt's bread supply. And Faisal says to Kennedy, your outreach to Egypt, the economic assistance you are providing to Egypt is freeing up resources to threaten all your friends and change the balance of power in the region. What we need are arms from you and assurances from you. Sound familiar? You think that's maybe what the President heard a couple weeks ago at the GCC summit? What have we been hearing from the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Kuwaitis, and others for the last couple of years? What was their concern about lifting sanctions against Iran as part of the nuclear deal? It's going to free up resources which will be used against us. What do these two examples represent? They demonstrate, in the first instance, what matters to Arab leaders. What is their main preoccupation, what is their main priority, is their security and their survival. They were never going to make their relationship with us dependent upon our relationship with Israel. The threat to them came from their regional adversaries, whether it was Nasser in the 50s and 60s, or it was Gaddafi, or it was Saddam Hussein, or it was Iran today. That has been their preoccupation. Now, we don't always have to accept their priorities, but we have to understand their priorities if we're going to shape our policies more effectively in the region. I said there were three assumptions. There was a third assumption. Again, it's been embedded in every administration from Truman to Obama. The third assumption was you can't change the region and you can't change the American position in the region unless you resolve the Palestinian issue. Now you're looking at somebody who spent an awful lot of time trying to resolve that issue. And I still believe it's important. I still believe it's important because I want Israel to be able to live in peace. I don't want Israel to become a binational state. I still believe it's important to work on the issue, but I never worked on it because I thought this is a game changer in the region. You know, if tomorrow you could solve this issue, it wouldn't stop one barrel bomb in Syria. It wouldn't roll ISIS back 1 meter. It wouldn't change Iran's ambitions in the region. It wouldn't change the struggle that Egypt is facing. It wouldn't put Yemen back together. It wouldn't make Libya whole. It doesn't mean it's not an issue to work on, but it needs to be put in perspective. You need to focus on what is possible with it and what isn't. Today, honestly, I don't think you can resolve it. One of the problems we face in diplomacy or in the region more generally, focus on the right objective. Don't create binary choices. Don't approach this issue as, if we can't solve it, we'll do nothing. Those aren't your only two choices. Even today, as I said, from my perspective, it's important to deal with the issue. It's important for Israel to deal with the issue. Israel needs to find a way to make its settlement policy consistent with the two-state outcome. Israel needs to find a way to show it can take an initiative, partly to blunt the delegitimization movement. The delegitimization of Israel today is a new form of anti-Semitism. It's driven by a premise that the Jewish people don't have a right to self-determination, that the Jewish people don't have a right to a state of their own. And those who are the delegitimizers, they disguise their purpose. What is BDS? BDS rejects the consensus internationally of 2 states for 2 peoples. But nobody knows it because it focuses on settlements. If you make settlement policy consistent with a 2-state outcome, you expose them. In any case, look, I wrote this book because I wanted to educate the next administration. I wanted to focus on the lessons that haven't been learned over time. I am fundamentally an optimist about the relationship because I look at the region. I look at Israel. Mr. Gamliel, you said Israel is the only democracy in the region. It's a fact. It's not an argument. It's a fact. We share values and interests with Israel. The same forces that threaten Israel threaten us. You know, we need an America that is engaged in the world. Right? When you think about what we're facing today, I'm optimistic about what the relationship will be, what the next administration will do with Israel for a simple reason. It isn't just that Israel is the only democracy in the region. Look at the region itself. This is a region that's going to be characterized by terrible turmoil, terrible struggle, terrible conflict. It's a struggle over identity and who's going to define it between radical Islamists, Sunni and Shia, radical Islamists and non-Islamists. It's going to be a region characterized by unpredictability and uncertainty. Contrast that uncertainty with one certainty: Israel. Israel's not going anyplace. Israel will remain a democracy. Look, like any democracy, however it works to deal with its problems, it may not be in a linear direction. But there's one country in the region that is governed by a rule of law. There's one country in the region that has a separation of powers. There's one country in the region that has an independent judiciary, an independent Supreme Court that should be protected. There's one country in the region that has freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of the media. There's one country in the region with regularly and unregularly scheduled elections. I know you prefer to have more regularly scheduled elections. I know that. But you know what? There's one country in the region where the loser accepts the outcomes in elections. The real hallmark of democracy? There's one country in the region where women's rights are respected, where gay rights are respected. That one country is Israel. I can't imagine that the next administration, when it looks at the region, won't understand that picture. And that's the reason I entitled the book Doomed to Succeed. Thank you very much.